Humanity finally revealed their hidden fleet, ancient warships that terrified the galaxy. The transmission came in at 300 hours. And it was not a request. I was standing at the observation window of Verith Station when the Valkyrie ultimatum scrolled across my data screen. My name is Yara Solis. I'm a commander in the United Earth Defense Corps, and for the past 3 years I had served as Earth's senior military liaison to the Galactic Council. I had sat through hundreds of meetings in that curved chamber where 17 species argued about trade lanes and border disputes. I had learned to read alien expressions, alien pauses, alien silences. I thought I had seen everything this galaxy could throw at a room full of diplomats. I had not seen anything yet. The ultimatum was brief. The Valkyrie Dominion, the most militarily aggressive power in the known galaxy, was demanding that Earth surrender 3 of its outer colony systems within 96 hours. These were not empty rocks. 40 million humans lived on those worlds. They had farms, schools, hospitals, children who had never set foot on Earth but called those red soil planets home. The Valkyrie did not offer negotiation. They offered a choice between surrender and what their transmission called protective integration, which every diplomat in the council understood to mean conquest. The chamber erupted the moment the message finished playing. I watched the Lethani consul lean toward her aide and speak in rapid, quiet syllables. The brief delegates were already on their feet, their upper limbs moving in the agitated pattern I had learned meant alarm. The Valkyrie ambassador, a tall creature named Dreth, stood at the center of the floor with his 4 arms folded and his golden eyes half closed. He looked bored. He looked like a being who already knew how the next chapter would end. Earth's counselor, a composed woman named Diana Holt, did not raise her voice. She did not stand dramatically. She simply pressed her fingertips together and said, in a level tone that carried clearly across the chamber, that Earth would require a 72-hour recess to consult its defense assets before responding. Dreth made a sound. It was a short, clicking sound that came from the back of his throat. His translator rendered it as laughter. His aide leaned toward him and said something in Kari that the open channel should not have picked up, but it did. My earpiece translated it in real time. The words were roughly, "What defense assets?" Several of the other delegates did not laugh out loud, but I saw the way they looked at each other. I saw the small movements, the quick glances. Humanity had been a member of the Galactic Council for 2 centuries. We were respected for our medicine, our art, our stubbornness in negotiation. We were not feared. We were the species everyone knew had one small fleet of patrol ships and a string of quiet colonies, the species that everyone quietly assumed would fold if someone pushed hard enough. Diana Holt did not react to the laughter. She gathered her materials, stood and walked out of the chamber. I fell into step behind her. Just before the doors closed, I glanced back at Dreth. He was still wearing that bored expression. I did not sleep for the next 24 hours. I spent those hours doing what any military liaison does in a crisis: gathering information, running analysis, preparing contingency options that I already knew were inadequate. Earth's official defense fleet could hold a border for a few weeks at best against The Velkari Navy, which had crushed 2 other species in the last century. It would not last much longer than that. I filed 3 reports. I drank too much coffee. I stared at star maps and found no good answers. On the 48th hour, I received an encrypted message from Director Cal Han of Earth Strategic Command. It contained no text, just a set of coordinates, a clearance code I had never seen before, and a 3-word instruction: come alone now. The coordinates were not on any chart I had access to. I had to enter them manually into a private shuttle, disable the standard navigation logging, and fly for 6 hours into deep space. There was nothing at those coordinates on any official record, no station, no outpost, no debris field, just a region of space where sensors produced a faint, harmless-looking interference pattern that I now realized had probably been engineered to look that way. I dropped out of faster-than-light travel and immediately understood why my sensors were struggling. There were ships in front of me. Not patrol ships, not escort frigates, not the modest vessels I had spent 3 years thinking were the full extent of Earth's military reach. These were warships of a scale that my brain initially refused to process correctly. The largest was directly ahead, a vessel so long that my shuttle's forward cameras could not capture both ends of it in a single frame. It was dark-hulled, almost perfectly black, running no beacon lights, no identification signals. It sat in the void like a piece of the void itself, something that had always been there, something that the universe had simply chosen not to mention. And it was not alone. In every direction, at distances that should have been empty space, more of them waited. My hands were steady on the controls. My voice was not. I opened a channel to the coordinates Director Han had given me and said quietly that I had arrived. His voice came back immediately. He sounded calm. He sounded the way person sounds when they have been carrying a very large secret for a very long time and have finally, carefully chosen to set it down. Commander Solis, he said, what you are looking at is the first armada. It has been waiting here for 140 years. We built it in the dark and we never told anyone, not even most of us. The largest ship in front of me was 14 km long. I counted the vessels I could see with visual confirmation alone, without sensor assistance, just by looking at the shapes against the stars. I stopped counting at 200. Director, I said, how many? There was a brief pause. 300 in the first armada, he said, and the first is not the only one. Outside my window, the enormous dark ship sat perfectly still, patient as a sleeping mountain. It had been sleeping here for 140 years. It had been waiting without a sound, without a signal, for exactly this moment. In 96 hours, the Velgori expected Earth to surrender. I exhaled slowly, and for the first time in 48 sleepless hours, I did not feel like we were losing. They gave me a shuttle escort to the flagship. Its name was the Endurance, and the name suited it in a way I would only fully understand later. The docking bay alone was large enough to hold 6 of Earth's standard patrol vessels side by side with room to spare. The interior corridors were lit with a low, steady amber light, wide enough that 4 people could walk abreast comfortably, and the walls had a texture I could not immediately identify, something between stone and metal that seemed to absorb sound without deadening it completely. Admiral Caden Morse met me at the end of the docking ramp. He was 81 years old. With that kind of posture that comes from decades of habit rather than effort, white-haired, brown-eyed. Unhurried, he shook my hand and looked at my face the way experienced commanders always do when they meet someone new, taking a quiet inventory. "First time seeing them?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He nodded. "Everyone has the same look. The first time. Come on, I'll walk you through it." He did not give me a tour of the whole ship. That would have taken days. He took me to 3 places: the bridge, the engine core, and the archive room. The bridge was enormous and quiet. It operated with a crew of 240. But the silence was the first thing that struck me. No shouting, no raised voices, no dramatic tension, just steady movement and low conversation, the sound of a team that had been training together long enough that they no longer needed to fill the air with noise. The main display was a 3-dimensional star map that occupied the center of the room, real-time, updating with data from sensors I had never encountered in any official Earth vessel. "We have been running active training deployments inside the nebula field for 60 years, Admiral Morse said. "Crews rotate on a classified posting cycle. Every person on the ship has been here before. Some of them have been here 3 times. And none of them talked," I said. "They signed agreements," he said, "but more than that, they understood what they were part of. You don't talk about something like this, you protect it. Because the moment the galaxy knows you have it, the advantage changes." He took me to the engine core next. I am not an engineer, but I've been around enough ship systems in my career to understand basic drive mechanics. What I saw in the engine core of the Endurance was not basic. The chamber was 3 decks tall, a vast cylindrical space filled with components arranged a lattice pattern that reminded me faintly of something organic, like the inside of a living structure rather than a machine. The energy signature was unlike anything I had ever seen in a human vessel. It was almost silent, just a deep, low vibration that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. "That drive," Admiral Morse said, watching my face, "is not a human design, not originally." He let that sit for a moment. "Before we joined the Galactic Council," he said, "before first contact was officially announced, our deep space survey team spent 30 years working the outer regions alone. Standard protocol was to map, catalog, and report. One survey team found something different. 3 separate debris fields, each one ancient. The materials were not from any cataloged civilization. The designs were not in any database. Our scientists spent 15 years reverse engineering what they could find and then spent another 30 years improving on it." I looked at the drive lattice. "Whose design was it originally?" He walked me to the archive room before he answered. The archive room was small compared to the rest of the ship, a rectangular space with walls lined entirely in data storage panels and a central table with a display system built into its surface. Admiral Morse placed his hand on the table, entered a code, and brought up a file. The display showed a species profile. The image was a reconstruction assembled from fragmentary biological evidence found in the debris fields, not a photograph but an educated approximation. They were tall, long-limbed, with wide-set eyes and a bone structure that suggested they had evolved on a high-gravity world. They had 4 fingers on each hand. They had been gone for a very long time. We call them the Inhari, Admiral Morse said. That is the closest phonetic approximation we could construct from their written records. They predate the Galactic Council by roughly 80,000 years at their peak based on the scale of the debris and the complexity of their technology. They were significantly more advanced than any species currently in the Council. What happened to them? I asked. We don't know the full picture yet, he said, but we know they built weapons. These weapons. And we know they built them because something out there scared them badly enough to push their entire civilization onto a war footing. He closed the file. The Velkari, he said, have a religion. Their creator figures, the beings they believe shape the galaxy. The ancient time, the ones they name in their oldest prayers, the ones whose symbols appear in the oldest stones on their homeworld. I already felt where this was going. They are the Inhari, he said simply. I let that settle. The Velkari worshipped the Inhari as gods, and here in this ship, in this hidden fleet of 300 vessels, humanity had taken the Inhari's technology, studied it, improved it, and built it into the most powerful warships in the known galaxy. We had been flying their god ships, and we had made them better. Why, I finally asked, why build all of this? Why the secrecy? Why 140 years? Admiral Morse turned off the display and faced me directly. Because we studied history, he said. Not just our own history, every civilization in the Council's records. We looked at every species that had ever made first contact with a more powerful neighbor, and we asked what happened to them. The answer was consistent enough to be considered a pattern. Eventually, the stronger party always found a reason to absorb the weaker one. Sometimes it took decades, sometimes centuries, but it happened every time. He walked to the room's small viewport and looked out at the dark. So we made a decision early on that we would not wait for that moment to arrive. Unprepared. We did not build this fleet to start anything. We built it so that if someone else tried to start something, we would be in a position to finish it, and we kept it secret because a deterrent that the other side knows about stops being a deterrent. It becomes a negotiating chip, a pressure point, something to be countered. He turned back to me. We needed it to be a fact that could not be countered, something that would simply exist, fully formed at the exact moment it was needed. He looked at the clock on the wall. That moment, he said, is in about 40 hours. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Get some rest, Commander. You are going to be my diplomatic observer for what happens next. I need you sharp, and I need you to understand what we are about. Because when we walk into Velkari space, I want someone beside me who can talk to the galaxy afterward and explain that we came in peace, even if it did not look entirely peaceful. I lay down in the bunk they gave me and stared at the ceiling of the Endurance and thought about a dead civilization that had built godlike weapons against something that frightened them. I thought about the fact that despite those weapons, they were still gone. I did not sleep much, but I got up in the morning and I was ready. The moment the Endurance dropped out of faster than light travel, I understood what the phrase "drop the curtain" actually meant. We were 30,000 km from the lead ship of the Velkari border fleet. I was standing At the secondary observation post on the bridge, one level above the main crew floor with a full view of the forward screens, the Valkyrie fleet was arranged in a defensive arc, 17 vessels heavy, cruisers and 2 carrier-class ships, the kind of formation that had made other species turn around and go home. Then the rest of the First Armada arrived. They did not arrive loudly. There was no dramatic pulse of light, no shock wave, no theatrical entrance. One moment the space around the Valkyrie formation was empty, and the next it was not. 300 ships materialized across a wide arc encircling the Valkyrie position, without closing in, without pointing weapons, without making a single aggressive move. They simply appeared, and they were simply there. And the scale of them against the Valkyrie fleet was like placing 17 stones beside a mountain range and calling it a fair comparison. The Valkyrie border fleet went completely silent. I watched the communication indicators on the bridge. Their fleet-to-fleet channel flatlined for 11 seconds. 11 seconds in a military emergency is a very long time. It means that the people on those ships looked at their screens, looked at each other, and had nothing to say because nothing in their training had prepared them for this exact situation. Then their fleet commander opened a channel. His name was Admiral Thrax. I had read his file. 30-year veteran, commanded the Valkyrie Eastern expansion campaigns. Never lost a battle. He had a reputation for being unshakable. His voice when it came through was steady, I will give him that, but it was a performed steadiness, the kind of steady that a person has to work to maintain. Unidentified vessels, he said. Transmit identification codes and state your origin. You are in Valkyrie sovereign border space. Admiral Morse looked at his communications officer and gave a small nod. The Endurance transmitted the identification registry of every ship in the First Armada. Full codes, full specifications, full records. It took about 4 seconds for the data to transmit. It took considerably longer than that for the Valkyrie fleet to process what they were receiving. I watched the indicators. Their internal communication channels lit up like a circuit board. The chatter was dense and rapid, and I caught fragments through the translation feed. Words like impossible and those markings. And Anhari and someone in their fleet, historian or a records officer, was apparently shouting because their voice cut through the chatter at a volume that was hard to miss. The ship markings we used were based on the Anhari originals. We had not changed them, partly out of respect for the source and partly, I later understood, because Admiral Morse and the engineers who designed the fleet had known exactly what those markings would mean to any civilization old enough to remember the Anhari myths, which included the Valkyrie, whose religion was built on them. Thrax came back on the channel. His performed steadiness had developed a crack in it. Those registry codes are not in any current database, he said. That is correct, Admiral Morse replied. They predate the current database by some margin. You are welcome to verify the hull alloy signatures against your historical records. We will wait. There was a pause. Simultaneously, on the Galactic Council's emergency broadcast channel, which I was monitoring on a secondary screen, the reaction was reaching its own peak. The council session had convened in Emergency format the moment our fleet appeared on the galaxy-wide sensor net. Every ambassador, every military advisor, every senior official of every species in the known galaxy was watching what was happening at the Velkari border. The Lethani delegation had gone completely still, not quiet, not careful, but physically still in a way that I had never seen from them. The Lethani were the most powerful military civilization currently in the Council. Their ships were the fastest, their weapons the most precisely engineered, their strategic doctrine the most sophisticated. They had assumed with the calm confidence of a species that has held the top position for 4 centuries that there was no fleet in existence they could not evaluate and categorize. Within moments of encountering it, they were evaluating and they were not speaking, and that silence told me everything. Admiral Thrax opened the channel again. "The markings you carry," he said, and his voice had a different quality now. Something between anger and something I can only describe as vertigo. "Those belong to the Inhari. They are sacred. You do not have the right to carry those markings." Admiral Morse leaned slightly forward. "With respect, Admiral," he said, "we earned the right. We found the ships. We studied the ships. We improved on the ships, and we have been carrying those markings for 140 years without telling anyone, which I think demonstrates a level of patience and restraint that should be recognized." Thrax was quiet. "Now," Admiral Morse continued, "I believe there is a piece of council business that brought us here. Earth received an ultimatum 4 days ago. 3 colony systems, 96 hours. Surrender or face integration. I am here on behalf of Earth's response." The channel hummed. "My response is no," Admiral Morse said pleasantly. "Earth will not be surrendering any colony systems. The 40 million people living on those worlds will continue to live on those worlds undisturbed. Furthermore, the Velkari Dominion will withdraw all forces currently positioned within the contested border zone to their pre-expansion line within 48 hours. This is not a counteroffer, it is a statement of what is going to happen." I opened my own secondary channel to Thrax's flagship, a direct line, commander to commander, separate from the main frequency. Protocol allowed for it. Thrax accepted the channel after a 6-second delay. "Admiral Thrax," I said, "my name is Commander Yara Solis. I am Earth's military liaison to the Galactic Council. I want to speak plainly with you. Separate from the formal channel." Another pause. "Speak," he said. "Our targeting systems have already completed a full scan of your fleet," I said. "I want to be very clear that we did not come here to destroy anything. We do not want that outcome. We have never wanted that outcome. We built these ships for exactly this kind of moment, the moment when someone looks at Earth and decides that because we have been quiet, we must be easy. We came here today to correct that misunderstanding, not to start anything." Silence. "But Admiral," I said, "I need you to understand that these ships have been waiting 140 years for a reason to move. And the reason to move was always going to be exactly this. Someone threatening 40 million of our people. So I am asking you as directly as I know how to ask to take the exit that is being offered to you right now, because it is a genuine offer and because the alternative is not something either of our peoples will look back on with any satisfaction. The silence on the channel stretched, long enough that I thought he had closed it. Then he spoke. "Stand by," he said. 12 minutes later, the Valkyrie fleet began to move, slowly, deliberately, repositioning toward their pre-expansion border. No final transmission, no formal acknowledgement. They simply moved, and the message in that movement was clear to every sensor and every eye watching. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council erupted for the second time in 4 days. I stood on the bridge of the Endurance and watched the Valkyrie fleet withdraw on the forward screen and tried to process what I was feeling, not triumph. Something quieter than that, something closer to the feeling of watching a very old debt finally get paid. Admiral Morse came to stand beside me. He looked at the screen for a moment. "Good work on the secondary channel," he said. "I just talked to him," I said. "Sometimes that is all it takes," he said. "Sometimes people just need someone to speak to them honestly." My secondary screen lit up, a new message encrypted from the Lethani console. Irav. The message was brief. 7 words, and those 7 words moved through me like cold water. "We need to speak alone, come quickly." I stared at those words for a long moment. In 3 years of working with the Galactic Council, the Lethani had never once sent me a message that carried that kind of urgency. They were an 800-year-lived species. They did not do urgency. Whatever she had to say, it was not about the Valkyrie. Something in those 7 words told me the Valkyrie had never been the real story. Console Irav's private vessel was a modest ship by Lethani standards, long and narrow with a silver-gray hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It docked beside the Endurance at a point I had arranged through back channels, away from the ongoing council feeds, away from the reporters and analysts who were already building a storm of commentary around the events of the past 4 days. She met me in the vessel's central meeting room, standing at the window with her back to the door. When I entered, she was tall as all Lethani were, with the elongated proportions of her species and the deep amber coloring that indicated old age among her people. She had lived through 3 interstellar wars and the extinction of 2 civilizations she had personally known. She had been the Lethani Council for 40 years. She turned when I came in and I saw her face clearly. Irav was afraid. Not the kind of fear that comes from a sudden shock. This was a deep-settled fear, the kind that had been building for a long time and had finally found the moment to step into the light. "Sit down, Commander," she said. I sat. She remained standing, which told me she needed to move while she talked. "I know about Cradle," she said. "I have known for 17 years. Cradle was the code name for the hidden Fleet's assembly region. The fact that she knew it told me the Lethani intelligence network was considerably deeper than Earth security teams had assumed. I kept my expression neutral. Our long-range monitoring detected faint residual energy signatures from the nebula field approximately 20 years ago, she said. It took our analysts 3 years to conclude that the interference was deliberate, engineered. We spent another 4 years determining the scale of what was behind it. "And you said nothing," I said. "We said nothing," she confirmed. She moved to the other side of the window. "Because we respected what you were doing. The Lethani have studied history. Longer than almost any species in the Council. We have watched civilizations rise and fall for 4 centuries from our position at the top of the Council structure. We have seen what happens to species that trust too completely, that build too openly, that assume that because they are members of a collective body, they are protected by that body. She looked at me directly. They are not. We know, I said. Yes, she said, you clearly do, which is why we kept your secret. We decided that a species clever enough and patient enough and quietly determined enough to build what you built in the dark without a word for 140 years was a species that deserved to keep its advantage until the moment it chose to reveal it. She paused, and the moment was chosen. Well, she moved to the table, sat down across from me, and folded her hands on the surface. The gesture was deliberate, a signal that the easier part of the conversation was over. I am not here to talk about the Valkyrie, she said. The Valkyrie are a problem that has been resolved. I am here to talk about why the Anhari built those ships in the first place. My posture changed slightly. I felt it before I controlled it. We have our own records, Irav said. The Lethani have been keeping historical archives for 600 years. We have fragments, partial records, translated portions of material from dead civilizations. The Anhari appear in our records, though not by that name. They appear as a reference point, a civilization that our earliest archivists described as the ones who were preparing for something they would not name. Preparing for what? I said. She was quiet for a moment. We were never certain, she said. Fragments were incomplete, but there was a phrase that appeared in multiple independent source records from the Anhari period, a consistent phrase across at least 4 separate civilizations that existed near Anhari space in the centuries before they disappeared. The phrase translates differently depending on the source language, but the core meaning is consistent. She paused. It comes from the outer dark. The room was quiet. What does? I asked. We do not know exactly, she said. We know that the Anhari detected something. We know that detection changed their entire civilization almost overnight. Their archaeological record, to the extent we have access to it, shows a sudden and total shift from a largely peaceful, expansion-focused society to a full military production economy over the span of a single generation. Every resource redirected, every priority changed. An entire civilization going on to a war footing with an urgency that their neighbors at the time apparently found disturbing and baffling. She stood again. She could not keep still. And then they were gone, she said. Not gradually, not in a war that left wreckage on both sides. They simply stopped being present. Their worlds were empty. Their stations were silent. Their fleet, or most of it, was unaccounted for. The civilizations around them at the time recorded the disappearance over a period of less than 30 years, 1 generation. I thought about the debris fields our survey teams had found, the wreckage that had become the backbone of the First Armada. They fought something, I said. They tried to, Irav said. Whether they succeeded, we do not know. But they were gone, and whatever they were fighting was not gone with them. Because the phrase comes from the outer dark continued to appear in records for another 200 years after the Anhari disappeared. In the records of the civilizations that replaced them until those records simply trailed off as, well, she faced me directly. Commander, she said, I am telling you this because of what your people found in the Enhari debris. I know you found archival material along with the physical components. I know your researchers have been studying that material, and I am asking you plainly whether what you found in that material matches what I am telling you. I looked at her for a long moment. I need to make a call, I said. I reached Director Han from the privacy of the meeting room's communications alcove. I told him what Arav had shared. There was a pause on his end that went on longer than I expected. Then he said, come to Luna, come. Tonight. He transmitted a clearance code that I had never seen in any official directory. When I inputted it into my identification system, it returned a classification level that I did not know existed. I returned to the meeting room. Arav was standing at the window again. I have to go to Earth, I said. She turned. You already knew, she said. It was not a question. Some of us did, I said honestly. I did not, but some of us did. She nodded slowly. Commander, she said as I moved toward the door. One more thing, the phrase, the one I mentioned, it appears in our most recent outer dark monitoring data as well. I stopped. We picked it up 8 months ago, she said, a faint signal, very deep in the outer regions. We have been analyzing it. Since then, we have not been able to conclude with certainty that it is meaningful, but we have also not been able to conclude with certainty that it is not. I looked at her. How faint, I said. Faint enough, she said, that 2 months ago we almost dismissed it entirely. But faint things tend to grow louder if you wait long enough. I left her ship and went to find a faster vessel. The facility under the lunar surface was not on any public map. The elevator that descended to it ran for 3 minutes after the lunar surface station's basement level, which meant it was deep, much deeper than any mining or research installation I had heard of. When the doors opened, I stepped into a corridor that was lit like a clean laboratory and walked for 4 minutes before reaching the archive proper. Director Han was already there, along with 3 people I did not recognize, one of whom was in a research division uniform I had never seen before. Admiral Morse was there, too, standing with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had been expecting this conversation for a while. The archive room was larger than I expected. The storage systems went floor to ceiling on every wall, and the central display table was larger than the one on the Endurance. Director Han did not offer small talk. He walked directly to the table and brought up a file. You want to know if we found the same thing Arav described, he said. Yes, I said. He opened the file. The display showed a timeline annotated in multiple languages with the Enhari script running along the bottom as a reference source. The sections were dense and the annotations were detailed, but Han pointed to a specific cluster near the end of the timeline, the last recorded Enhari entries before their civilization's record went silent. This is from the deepest archive we recovered from the 3rd debris field. He said it took 9 years to translate fully. Our linguistics teams were working in complete isolation. The final entry, the last one in chronological order, was translated about 6 years ago. He highlighted a text block and the translation appeared beside it. I read it. It took me a moment to make sure I had read it correctly, then I read it again. The text said, "We leave our weapons to whoever finds them. We hope they are braver than we were. We hope they are stranger. We hope against everything that they are human." I looked up at Director Hahn. "That cannot be right," I said. "This is 80,000 years old. They cannot have written that. They did not know we existed." Hahn nodded slowly. "We know we have verified the translation 11 times by 4 independent teams. We have cross-referenced the grammar structure against every other Anhari document we recovered. The word in their language that our system renders as human is a specific term. It does not mean person or being or ally. It is a specific proper noun that appears nowhere else in the Anhari records we have." The room was very quiet. "Our linguists," he continued, "spent 3 years debating whether the translation was an error. Eventually, they stopped debating it because there was no error they could identify. The text says what it says." Admiral Morse spoke from across the room. "Whatever they were afraid of," he said, "they believed that the species capable of standing against it had not yet arrived when they built those ships, so they left the ships for us, whoever us turned out to be." I stared at the words on the display, and then every perimeter alarm in the facility went off at the same time. Not one, not two. Every single outer dark monitoring station, all 47 of them, spread across the farthest reaches of Earth sensor network triggered simultaneously. The alert sound was one I had never heard before, a continuous low tone that the system documentation apparently reserved for a category of event that the engineers who designed it had hoped would never occur. Director Hahn moved to the emergency panel on the wall and pulled the status feed. He looked at it. His face changed. "It is moving toward us," he said, quietly, "from the outer dark, whatever. The Anhara built those ships to fight." He looked up at the room. "It noticed us when we turned on the fleet." Admiral Morse was already reaching for his communicator. I was already running for the elevator. The moment I stepped back onto the bridge of the Endurance, I knew that everything from the previous 4 days was prologue. The Valkyrie ultimatum, the fleet reveal, the showdown at the border, Irav's warning, the words left behind by a dead civilization 80,000 years ago. All of it had been a long, winding road leading to this. The outer dark alarms were still running on every monitoring network in the galaxy. I knew because the Council emergency channel was a wall of noise. 47 separate alerts merging into a single continuous transmission that no one on the Council had the vocabulary to address because nothing in the Council's records had ever triggered all the outer monitors at once. Admiral Morse was at the main display. When I arrived, he did not look up immediately. He was studying the tracking data with the focused stillness of a man doing rapid calculations that he does not want to interrupt. "Give me a number," I said. "One entity," he said, "as far as we can determine, but entity might not be the right word. It is large, very large. Larger than any ship in the known galaxy, including ours. It is moving at a speed that should not be physically possible for something of its mass, and it is moving directly toward the Council's central systems. Time to intercept range, I said. At current speed, 11 days, he said. But it is not moving at a constant speed, it is accelerating. He finally looked up. The Valkyrie have already contacted us. He said, 3 other council species in the last 2 hours. They want to know if we can do something about this. Can we? I said. He held my gaze for a moment. That is what we built these ships for. He said, not for the Valkyrie, not for border disputes or political standoffs. We built them because humanity has always understood on a deep level that we could never quite articulate to anyone else that the universe is very old and very large, and that most of what is in it has never been mapped, and the unmapped things are not always quiet. He turned back to the display. The Anhari knew that. They tried to prepare for it. We took their preparation and we improved it, and now we are going to find out if it is enough. He gave a command that went to every ship in the first armada. Then he gave a second command, one I had not heard before, on a frequency I did not recognize. The response was immediate. On the far edge of the tracking display, new shapes appeared, emerging from different points in space, from regions that the galaxy-wide sensor net had recorded as empty for as long as the net had existed, ship after ship after ship. More of them, different configuration from the first armada, but the same dark hull, the same Anhari markings, the same massive scale. The second armada, and then from a third set of coordinates, the third. 600 ships total. I counted them on the display as they assembled into formation. 600 vessels, every one of them built on the bones of a civilization that had understood what was out there and had tried to prepare the next species in line. 600 ships that humanity had kept secret for over a century, in the patient conviction that the secret would someday matter. The Galactic Council feed, which I was monitoring on a secondary screen, captured the moment the full fleet appeared on the galaxy-wide sensor net. Every species, every watching station, every military analyst across 17 civilizations. They all saw 600 ships materialize in formation, and for approximately 20 seconds no one on any channel said a single word. Then the Valkyrie ambassador made the transmission that I think every historian will reference when they write about this period. It was a formal council broadcast, recorded, logged, transmitted to every member civilization. Admiral Thrax himself delivered it, the same admiral whose fleet had backed down 4 days ago. His voice was steady, and it cost him something to make it so. He said that the Valkyrie Dominion formally and unconditionally requested that humanity take defensive action on behalf of all council member civilizations. He said that the Valkyrie fleet and every asset the Dominion could commit stood ready to support in any capacity that Earth's commanders considered useful. He said it with the careful precision of a proud species making an enormous concession and doing it anyway, because pride is a luxury that disappears very quickly when something vast and old and incomprehensible is accelerating toward your home world. Admiral Morse received the transmission. He looked at me. "You want to respond?" he said. "No," I said, "you do it." He nodded once. He opened the council broadcast channel. "This is Admiral Cadden Morse commanding the United Earth Defense Corps 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Armadas," he said. "We acknowledge the Council's request. We Are moving now. All Council forces stand down from the intercept zone and hold defensive positions around inhabited systems. This is not because we do not value your support. It is because what is coming has not been fought in 80,000 years, and we need room to work. He closed the channel. The formation began to move. I will not pretend the next 11 days were simple. They were not. We pushed the fleet to its maximum safe speed and still had days of travel before we reached the outer intercept zone, where our tracking models said the entity would be within effective engagement range. During those 11 days, I slept in 4-hour intervals and spent the rest of my time running coordination with the Council member civilizations who were evacuating outer settlements and repositioning their own forces well behind our line. Irav reached me on the second day of transit. She was aboard a Lethani command ship positioned well behind the engagement zone, coordinating the non-combat Council response. I wanted to tell you something, she said, before you reach the intercept. Point to. Tell me, I said. The phrase, she said, the one I mentioned in our records, it comes from the outer dark. She paused. Our oldest archive interpretation of that phrase. The context around it in the source text suggests that the civilization who wrote it were not describing a threat, they were describing a warning, something that a previous civilization, one even older than the Inhari, had attempted to communicate. She stopped. Attempted to communicate to whom? I said. To whoever came next, she said. It was a warning label, Commander, left in the fabric of local space so that whoever was advanced enough to detect it would know what they were dealing with before they were in the middle of it. Did it describe what we are dealing with? I said. Partially, she said. It described an entity that does not experience time the way biological life does, that does not have goals the way civilizations have goals, that moves through the galaxy at long intervals, at time scales measured in geological epochs, and that does not deliberately seek to cause harm in any meaningful sense. It simply moves, and biological life, the kind that builds cities and ships and archives, tends to be in the way. How was the Inhari supposed to stop something like that? I said. They were not trying to stop it, Irav said. The weapon systems we are talking about, the ones built into your fleet. Our analysis of the few Inhari technical fragments we have access to suggest they were not designed to destroy the entity. They were designed to redirect it, to persuade it in terms it could register, to change course. I held that thought for a moment. Like a very large road sign, I said. She was quiet for a second. That is not an inaccurate metaphor, she said, and if the Inhari were right, it responds to the right kind of signal, the way any moving thing responds to an obstacle, large enough and clear enough to notice. She paused again. Which means your ships need to be loud enough and coordinated enough to register as something worth going around. What if they are not? I said. Then we find out, she said simply. I closed the channel and went back to the forward display. On the day we reached the intercept zone, the entity became visible on direct sensors for the first time, rather than just as an alarm on a monitoring system. I stood at the bridge viewport and looked at it on the enhanced display, and the word entity still did not feel right for what I was seeing. It was not a ship, it was not a creature in any form I could map to biological life. It was a region of altered space, a zone, where light behaved differently, where physical laws seemed to be under some kind of pressure, and at the center of that zone was something that the display rendered as a shape only because the display needed to render it as something. It was very large. Admiral Morse gave the order to form up. 600 ships arranged themselves in a configuration I had seen in the Anhari technical files, a pattern that the engineers who studied those files had spent decades interpreting. It was not a battle formation in any conventional sense. It was more like an instrument being tuned, each ship finding its position relative to the others in a precise geometric arrangement that, once complete, allowed the combined drive systems of all 600 vessels to function as a single coordinated unit. The entity continued to move toward us. "This is the moment," Admiral Morse said, quietly, not to me specifically, to the bridge, to the ship, to the formation. "Everything we built this for, everything we kept quiet for, this is it, and we are ready." He gave the command. The 600 ships activated simultaneously. The combined output of 600 and hurried arrived drive cores operating in coordinated resonance produced a signal that my instruments could barely categorize. It was not a weapon discharge. It was not a conventional energy beam. It was something between a broadcast and a physical force statement in terms that operated below the level of language, below the level of biology, at the level of physics itself. It said in terms that required no translation, "We are here, we are real, we are not moving." The entity slowed. It did not stop immediately. It took 4 hours, during which no one on the bridge spoke at anything above a murmur. 4 hours of watching the tracking display and holding formation and not breaking the signal no matter what the instruments were reading. 4 hours of 600 crews on 600 ships, holding their positions by will and training, and the absolute refusal to flinch. Then it changed direction. Not sharply, not dramatically. It was a gradual curve, the kind of course chain that a very large, very old, very indifferent thing makes when it registers that the path ahead is occupied by something it has decided to go around. It moved in a long arc away from the Council's inhabited systems, back toward the outer dark it had come from. It did not pause. It did not acknowledge us in any way we could detect. It simply curved away as though we were a mountain it had decided not to cross, and continued on its way. We held formation for another 6 hours. After the last of its sensor signature faded from our instruments, nobody wanted to be wrong about this. Nobody wanted to assume. Then Admiral Moore stood straight, took a breath, and said, "Stand down." The bridge remained quiet for a long moment after that. I think we were all processing the fact that it had worked, that a dead civilization's 80,000-year-old blueprint, improved and expanded and carried in secret for 140 years by a species everyone in the galaxy had underestimated, had actually done what it was built to do. We lost 9 ships during the engagement, not to any direct action by the entity, but to the strain of holding the resonance formation at full output for 4 hours. 9 crews, 412 people, who held their posts and held the signal and did not break even when their systems were redlining. Their names are recorded. They will stay recorded. The council message was waiting when I came off the bridge, 17 civilizations. One message, formally signed by every member. It acknowledged what had happened, it acknowledged what humanity had done, and it contained a formal motion already passed by unanimous vote. While we were still in formation, that the seat at the council table previously designated as junior member, Earth, would be redesignated. The new designation was Guardian Compact. I walked into the council chamber for the first time after all of it. The chamber where the Valkyrie ambassador had laughed at the concept of Earth's defense assets, where 17 species had looked at us for 2 centuries and seen something small and manageable and easy to overlook. Every delegate rose when I entered. I took my seat at the center table. The plaque in front of me had already been changed. I read it once, then looked out at the chamber. Irav caught my eye from across the room and gave me the Lathani gesture that corresponds most closely to a nod of respect. I returned it. I thought about the Inhari, about a civilization that had stared into the outer dark 80,000 years ago and seen what was coming and spent everything they had trying to prepare for it, and ultimately had not been able to save themselves, but they had left something behind. They had left the tools and the hope and the inexplicable, impossible, specifically worded hope that the species who found those tools would be the right species for the job. I thought about 140 years of quiet, of ships being built in the dark, of a hidden nebula, of crews rotating through classified postings without a word, of engineers and admirals and politicians carrying a secret so large that it must have been exhausting year after year, saying nothing, building something, trusting that the moment would come when saying nothing would finally give way to doing everything. I thought about Admiral Morse's 4 words when he gave the order to move. Bring them all up. I thought about 40 million people on 3 colony worlds who were still there, still home. I thought about the 9 crews who held the line, and I thought that if the Inhari could see us, if that was somehow possible, if their 80,000-year-old hope had any way of reaching the present, then I hope what they saw looked like this: a species that had been staring at an empty sky for as long as it could remember, that had always suspected the sky was not actually empty, that had prepared in silence and in patience and in absolute refusal to be caught without an answer. We were alone for so long, staring at the dark between stars, wondering if something was out there. Something was out there. It had always been out there. It had been waiting in the long dark since before our species knew what stars were, and when it finally moved, and when every other civilization in the galaxy discovered they had nothing that could face it. Humanity was ready. Quietly, stubbornly, magnificently ready. We were always ready. That was just what we do.